Hi everyone, and welcome to our talk about building up our front-end library with the inner source approach. So, I think we have a technical problem with the...
Oh, let me get...
now
it
no.
works.
Okay. So, that's the agenda we brought you today. First of all, we give you a short context on DATEV, and then I'd like to share my history with InnerSource DATEV with you. After that, Max tells you about our experience with building our front-end library with the InnerSource approach. And last but not least, we'll have a short look at the ROI. So, DATEV. DATEV is the IT community for tax consultants, auditors, and lawyers, as well as their clients. DATEV was built in 1966, and it's now one of the largest provider of business solutions in Germany, as well as one of the largest IT service provider in Europe. We have solutions around HR management, payroll, taxes, public sector, payroll, and so on. Let's have a short look at the figures. Our turnover last year was about 1.5 billion euros. We have 40,000 members who trust in us, more than 850,000 clients who work with our solutions, and 9,000 employees who work for DATEV. So I think that's enough about DATEV. Let's have a look at InnerSource DATEV and my journey with InnerSource DATEV. It started about, 10 years ago. I had the requirement to establish a conversion service that should be used by multiple applications. And one day a colleague came to me and asked me if I had thought about realizing this using the InnerSource approach. No, I haven't thought about it. But after that, I read a little about InnerSource and I find it very interesting and compelling. Open up our development for contributions from all over the organization sounded great to me. And then I talked to my stakeholders and told them about the idea. And the answer was, it's a great idea. We absolutely should do that. That sounds very good. But you know, at the moment, we have a lot of pressure and, you know, we don't have any resources at maybe a later time. And that's what the text all stakeholders told me. So, well, looking back, I would say I had no experience with InnerSource. I didn't know much about the success factors, and I had no support from our management. So I wasn't able to convince our stakeholders. So it was a good idea, and I put it into my drawer for a later opportunity. A few years later, other colleagues started InnerSource project. They started building a front-end library with InnerSource. And they had great maintainers, and it was a success. They built the InnerSource library, they had a lot of contributions, everything went fine. It went fine till about 2020. Then our development department was completely reorganized. And the maintainers for the front-end library got lost. They didn't really get lost, but they took on new responsibilities. And no one cared about the community anymore. And self-organization is great, but for InnerSource projects, you need maintainers who support the community, who care for the contributions, who care about the quality of the project. And if the maintainers are gone, well, the contributions decreased, and one day the library was more or less dead. So 1 year later, about 2021, the management realized we need a front-end library. And so I was tasked with setting up a new front-end library, and also based on the InnerSource approach. And this time I had the support of our management, and they told me to build up a team with 3 persons and build the front-end library with them. And that was the time Max joined the team too. And we had a dream. We wanted to prove that InnerSource could be a success story at DATEV. Were we right, Max?
Well, I will tell you right after you give me the clicker. Thank you. And actually, right after I give you at least a little bit of context on that front-end library, or how we call it, our Dackel. For German speakers, that's obviously, the pun is intended. It is what you think of a front-end library to be. It's a library with nice and sweet components like buttons, or in this case, form elements. And the thing that was special about it, for me, is that from the very first moment, Inez told me, think of Dackel not only as a front-end library that we are going to build, but also use it as a pilot, as a vehicle to demonstrate, as you said, that inner source practices can work at DATEV. So from the very beginning, we isolated and documented carefully what we did. In total, 26 inner source practices that are repeatable and that we documented for our colleagues. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to read through all of them. In fact, where's Sebastian? Ah, he's not, there you are. Most of them, there is a huge overlap to the inner source patterns, actually. So the inner source patterns community is documenting a lot of them. And sometimes when we document it for our colleagues, it's really just a link to the patterns. And much of those things, it will be very familiar to you after a whole day of inner source here in Berlin. Of course, we made sure that we provided detailed user documentation so that we can win over users and turn Ah, no.
Okay.
This one works as well now. Thank you so much. Where were we? Of course, user documentation, because we wanted to turn users into contributors, and for that we have to win over the users first. Nothing new for you. Of course, we provided infrastructure and configured in our case, GitLab in a way that people could actually contribute. And of course, we had maintainers, or how at the InnerSource Commons, we sometimes call them trusted committers. And yes, we did not only provide an infrastructure for asynchronous communication, but we also tried to incentivize and move people to actually use it. What's pretty unique for us at DATEV in this project is that we made sure that not only us in the core team would be the maintainers, but gradually we wanted to share this responsibility with colleagues from other teams. We borrowed heavily from the Apache Software Foundation and how we set up those processes. And you can believe in a traditional company, this also raised some eyebrows in the beginning. So much about the context. This is our neat patch flow graph. So what you see here is all the teams that contributed to the front-end project as tiny little white boxes. And if there is a green edge, it means they contributed code and non-code contributions. If it's a gray edge, it's only code contributions. And we were really, really happy over the years when we collected a total of 99 teams contributing, or 314 contributors. What was a surprise to us is that recently a lot of work happens by inner source code contributions. So every piece of code that goes into this project goes through a merge request, is reviewed. Roughly 1/5 of all of those merge requests come from inner source contributors. So these numbers without context don't mean much. Certainly, they won't convince management. They will just tell you, well, you build a lot of collaboration, what's the benefit to me? One thing, though, that I was personally very happy about, and that's the last bullet point here, very much in the bottom, we grew the maintainer team from 3 maintainers in the beginning to 12 maintainers. And for me, it's very important that we achieved something that's called maintainer diversity. I think it's also an Apache term, isn't it? Yes, you're nodding. So in the open source world, maintainer diversity means you have maintainers from different companies. And that means you can be certain that not one company is calling the shot. We translated that to InnerSource to mean we wanted to have maintainers from different departments. And this is something we gladly achieved. So much about the context. Now, Inez, finally onto your question. Was it worth it? Inez was not the only one asking the question. In fact, some people were asking us the question, and even worse, some people were not asking us any questions about InnerSource. So what we did is, Inez and I and our colleague Vincent Ox, we compiled a report with a lot of colorful figures where we explained everything we learned. We explained the benefits we observed and also the challenges and the costs we observed. And I want to take you through a short summary of that. This is the data overview. So it's a 2.5 year period we were covering with that report, and we collected the data mostly from our GitLab instance and some organizational data from LDAP. What's important and what was important to us as well is that we from the very beginning coordinated very carefully with our workers' council. So we are engineers ourselves, and we don't want to be having some big brother looking over us. So we made sure that we anonymized everything carefully and also transparently documented if we were not able to anonymize something for whatever reason. The first thing we analyzed was the increase in development speed. So this is something, if you look at pretty much every piece of literature about InnerSource, it's a promise that InnerSource makes. Increase the development speed, increase time to market. So we were keen to learn, will InnerSource fulfill that promise for us? And so we measured what's the typical time from an issue being created to a merge request being merged. And if the maintainers worked on something, median, it was 30 days, 1 calendar month. So, come again? Oh no, it's really just calendar days, so we counted the weekends as well. But good point, yeah, thanks for pointing that out. So, when it was resolved by an InnerSource contributor, it was much quicker, it was 2 weeks actually. And if we were able to convince the person who initially submitted the issue that he or she should fix that issue themselves, then it was even 11 calendar days. And now, to be honest, I see you all making photos. I will tell you a secret. Such numbers can, of course, be skewed by all kinds of biases. So, for example, one could argue, and maybe this person would be right, that those numbers are skewed because maintainers typically take over the larger tasks, the more complex tasks. And this is probably true. And we presented this to our colleagues and to our management as honestly as we just did to you. And they were still happy to see about those 15 or 11 days because this is definitely not the normal median speed for many large companies. Another thing that a lot of our colleagues, a lot of our management cared about was the flexible assignment of developers. To measure that, we borrowed heavily from the work Anne Barcombe and her colleagues at University of Calgary are doing around habitual and episodic volunteering. Episodic volunteers or contributors are folks who come into a project, they fix what they need, and then they also leave again, while habituals are those who stay in the project, stay engaged in the community for a longer period of time with a lot of consistency. And what we found is that in our project we have 1/3 of those habitual contributors. Great. This made us very happy because it seems we're nice people and people like to work with us and we don't send them away. But we also had 2/3 of episodic contributors. And at first I might say, disappointed. I was like, what did we do wrong with those people? Why are they leaving us? And what we found out is, yes, we did some things wrong and we, of course, worked on fixing them. But also, it was just, they had their itch, they scratched it, they moved on. So for us, that was a clear indication that all those things we do in InnerSource, for example, a well-structured contributing MD, actually help people to get up to speed, to contribute, but also to leave again when they need. The knowledge transfer, this is another thing we wanted to demonstrate to folks, and that was mighty difficult to measure. So we came up with what we call the Good Samaritan comments. So whenever a commenter in an issue or merge request was not involved in this in any way, and also not a maintainer of the project, but contributed, we called it a Good Samaritan comment, obviously. And we found that those happen really, really often in the project. In fact, 23 times in the average month. So that means, to going back to the business days, once a business day, actually. And for us, this was at least an indication, not a proof, but an indication that knowledge transfer is happening. Of course, you can't really talk about persisting and transferring knowledge without coming back to the topic of asynchronous communication again. Luckily, I don't have to define it to you because Isabel so brilliantly did that earlier. The problem for us was it was fairly easy to show that passive documentation is there. You can just count the number of issues or the number of comments, but it's difficult to show that it's actually useful. And so our assumption was it's always useful when you reference it, And we found that every second week, one of our at least 1 month old issues would be referenced. Now, 1 month is not that old, so we plotted that in a histogram here, where we have on the y-axis the number of issues or merge requests, and on the x-axis down there the age. And what you can see there is that even 100 days, 200 days, 300 days, years after we had the initial discussion in an issue, we would come back and reference it. And this for us was substantiation that passive documentation is not only there, but also helpful for us and for our colleagues. We have a couple of benefits. Unfortunately, there were also challenges that Inez will tell us about once I handed the clicker back.
Yeah, you wouldn't have believed us if we only told you that there are only benefits, so the challenges. One challenge was to find the balance between asynchronous and synchronous communication. In normal, you have a product team, it's responsible for one component, and if you have questions or bugs or whatever, you talk to them, you call them and talk to them, set up a meeting. And if that happened, in our case, we told them, could you please open an issue in our issue tracker so everyone could read it and discuss there. And most of the colleagues find it very weird at the beginning. They told us, the maintainers of Dackel don't want to talk to us. They are a bit strange. It needed a lot of explanation to tell them why we were doing this, to get the passive documentation that helps everyone, and that it's not the point that we don't like them or don't want to talk to them. The next one was the responsibility. If you have a product team, it's responsible for a component, and if there are bugs, well, the product team will resolve it earlier or later. In our case, we provided the library as is. And if someone reported a bug to us, we asked nicely, would it be able that you fix the bug yourself? Some colleagues find it great because they could help themselves, but other colleagues were a bit irritated. So should we make your job now? That also needed a lot of explanation. And another point about responsibility, developers who contributed to Dackel were a bit concerned. If I make a contribution to Dackel now, am I responsible for it till the end of my life? No, surely not. If the merge request is committed, they are free again. And the maintainers take the responsibility again. And another point was the job of the maintainers. It's a great part of the job to evangelize and internalize inner source values and practices in the company. It's a lot of work to do this. Also, fill out the maintainer role and make the merge requests. Also, a lot of work. And if it's developers, they want to develop and not only to talk and to make presentations, to make merge requests. So you need the right kind of people who love that kind of job, who love to support others, who love to help others to be very good maintainers. So now we've seen the benefits and the challenges. And the question, was it a success? Would we do it again? Well, let's look at the facts. With this approach, we were able to build a front-end library that's now widely used in our applications. And we helped to make the knowledge transfer regarding front-end expertise across the organization. We helped teams on delivering the requirements and deliver their requirements more quickly than would have been possible with a central team. And besides that, we learned a lot about InnerSource, what makes InnerSource successful, what also can get in the way. And we also infected other colleagues with the InnerSource virus. There's another library near Dackel, which is driven with InnerSource, and other colleagues ask us if this would be a possibility for their project. So at the end, I would say, yes, it's a success story, and yes, I would do it again. And these are the 4 key takeaways we want you to take home with you after this day. The first one, document your pilot early on to make your success repeatable. InnerSource leads to knowledge sharing and faster development. You can demonstrate InnerSource benefits and return on invest by applying simple measurements. And in our case, the benefits outweigh the cons. So, thanks for your attention.